Welcome into another edition of Dipo's Den. I am your host, as always, Evan DiPasquale, and today is one of my huge guests. I really can't thank him enough for coming out and being on my show. He is the play-by-play man for the Buffalo Sabres, and is been such a great listen to. If you've listened to him over the past few years, has filled in the shoes. Great for an all-timer. Please welcome Dan Dunleavy, the voice of the Buffalo Sabres. Welcome to the show.
Thanks. Appreciate you having me on. And your timing couldn't have been better because I was out gardening earlier today, and now it's still, I don't know. I'm south of Buffalo, so it's raining here pretty good.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Wherever you are, but so good timing.
Yeah, I'm in the north town, so I haven't seen the rain yet, but I wouldn't be surprised if it comes north. I always feel like the south towns always gets like the brunt of the bad weather compared to the north towns. Like you always hear about when it comes to like the storms, it's like it's like the south towns, Hamburg, Orchard Park, those people that are getting the brunt of it. And
I found out since moving here now 2.5 years ago, I guess, that it's either those of us down here in the south towns, Hamburg and south of, obviously Orchard Park, which was hammered by a wicked storm as well this past winter, but also then the folks that are right on the shoreline of Lake Ontario, up top of where you are, up in the north too. So that'll happen. By the way, you'll notice I try not to be annoying about it, but whenever musical references come up, because before we started and went live, I'll tell your viewers and listeners that we were talking about Pink Floyd Dark Side of the Moon.
Hey, go ahead. I love it.
Yeah, an album you were raised on, and we're talking about our musical backgrounds, but you already dropped a Creedence Clearwater Revival reference in this podcast, so good on you.
All right. I'll take that. I'll take that. So what I want to
see if you remember which one that was when you're done, but you did
it. So I just want to ask, what was it like getting that first, becoming like, what made you want to go into broadcasting, and what was it like calling your first game ever in the NHL, whether that's on radio or on television?
Well, broadcasting for me, I mean, it really goes back to a point in high school, I think, that a lot of people have. And if any of your listeners or viewers are going through it now, the first thing I'll tell you is don't panic, because you'll find your way. You might not feel like it, but it's going to happen. And that was the case for me, really. I was going through high school thinking, what am I going to do? I didn't really have a concrete goal in mind, really, up until grade probably maybe even 11. And at that point, I'm kind of panicking because you've got a couple of years left to figure out, at least what you want to do post high school, or get into, if it be a trade or what have you. My father, for many years, from his teen years until his retirement, was a fireman in the city of Toronto. So, I kind of, when that goes on, I think a lot of us have that in the back of our minds, that maybe we'll follow in the steps of our fathers and do whatever they do. So for me, I was thinking, well, if I can't figure anything out, I'm fit, I'm able, I'll be a firefighter. I even had thoughts briefly of being a police officer. And then what happened was, one day, one of our high school classes, it was a communications class, which for many people at that point in Georgetown, Ontario, where I grew up, 45 minutes west of Toronto, I wouldn't say you considered it a throwaway class, but it certainly wasn't chemistry or calculus, right? I mean, you walked in and you read the news of the day, and it sounds interesting to say this now, especially in today's era of media. You literally learned how to go through and read a newspaper and pick out stories compared to editorials, pick out fact compared to fiction, and all. A lot of the discussion that's going on now with the way the media has grown and really just become this monster, which we all thought it was when we were growing up, but now it's not even comparable. But in that course, one day, our teacher took us to a television station. So again, this is going to date me to say this. Obviously, you have Spectrum TV in this area.
Yeah.
Back for me, in growing up in Georgetown, there was a station in a town called Acton, Ontario. And if anyone's ever traveled from this area up to Ontario, there used to be a place called the Old Hide House. It was a leather factory, and you could buy anything leather at this big, massive place that had a restaurant in it. You could buy leather furniture, leather jackets, leather pants, leather anything. So a lot of people would make the trip up to Acton to the Old Hide House, but they had a TV station there as well. So we were taken there for the day. And the moment, and I mean the moment I walked through the door, I said, this is it. And it was a really neat experience because I just thought nothing else really intrigued me and made me just, it was almost, it's a well, it's a fair comparison. Um, when I adopted Bandit, my rescue dog here that I got from Buffalo, it
Mhm.
was a Sabres event, and they gave us an opportunity, myself and some of the players, to see the puppies before we let everybody in that they were trying to find homes to that night. And Bandit came bouncing around the corner, and I had no intention of going home with the dog that night. I hadn't had one in over a decade since my husky had passed away. And Bandit bounces around the corner, and I just pointed at him and said, "That's it." And we picked him up and we brought him home. So that was the same for finding out this career that day in Acton. I just walked to the door and I said, "This is it." And I don't even know why I said it, other than it was just a feel that I had. Deeper back when I was a 5-year-old kid, my mom has photographs or had photographs. She's passed away, but pictures of me with a soap on a rope and a microphone standing in front of the stereo. And she said, "You used to play DJ in front of your dad's stereo since you were the age of 5." And of course, you don't remember that stuff. Your brain gets too clogged with trying to remember what you did yesterday as you get older. So, but apparently, back then, there was a love for just having a microphone in your hand and just kind of letting your character shine a little bit. And growing up watching Hockey Night in Canada, back in Ontario, and then watching Ted Darling on what was then over the air TV, Channel 2, when
Mhm.
the games were on free TV, they'd be, accessible to those of us who grew up in Southern Ontario. So we watched, my mom and I would watch Ted Darling every Sabres game. And we'd watch every Leaf game as well. So we're right in the middle, right? We're torn about both teams because both teams just had their own real character about them and differences. And so we were kind of the odd people in the bucket cheering on both sides there because we would watch both broadcasts. But from that, um, Mom and I together, we would sit there and we would try to mimic Ted Darling's call, who, by the way, is over my shoulder here in the office,
Yeah.
calling a game from the odd. And, that always stuck with me. And in my high school yearbook in Georgetown, when they asked what your goals and aspirations were post high school, I just decided to, one day in my basement at home, and I thought, if somebody could pay me to actually be at a sporting event and call that work, how do I get that? Like, how do I make that happen? Because that's pretty cool. And I thought it would be, at that point too, I'm thinking that is so far away from probably what's attainable. And that's why I want to share this with a lot of your, or all of your viewers and listeners, is that, sometimes what you think is not attainable, it definitely is. It doesn't matter what you're shooting for. You shoot for it and take a shot. And that's what I did. I mean, it took a long time, as we'll continue to discuss, for me to get that opportunity to finally call every single game in a season for a team. That was last year was the first time that ever happened for me. But it all started from sitting back and watching Ted Darling. And obviously, in Canada, you had your Foster Hewitt days, you had your Bob Cole days, you had your Danny Gallivan out of Montreal, who was on Hockey Night in Canada all the time, calling the Canadians and the Bruins rivalry, and those Flyers games and everything else too that you'd see out of Buffalo, and with Ted Darling calling those matchups. So there was a lot of passion in that job, and I knew it. And I thought, how do I make that happen? So that's what I pursued. Once I saw the TV station, I thought, oh, okay, this is how I do it. Who runs this station? Who do I talk to? Who gives me advice? Where do I go from here? So from that moment on, I just sought out the how do I get there, and that's how I got to this point.
Was it ever a goal to try and specifically do television or specifically do radio at all? Was that ever a plan, or
No,
did it just happen?
no, anything. I mean, I would have been, I like to think I'm a pretty good writer too. A lot of people who I've worked for in the past, including your boss, Alan Davis, would tell you that I probably deliver the longest winded questions in the world when I was coming up through radio. And perhaps a writer would have been a better avenue for me because I could express myself pretty easily. It was just, with your medium that you're in now and the medium I'm in, it's once you master the short to the point question, you actually become really good. So, you go through a point where you're trying to convince everyone that you know what you're talking about, and that takes up way too much time of the question instead of just asking the question. So I went through some years where I learned that, but no, the medium didn't matter. The actual line that I put in the high school yearbook in Georgetown said, to be a cameraman at a Super Bowl. That's exactly what I wrote. Because at that point I thought, guy running the camera is literally just watching the game, and that's what I'm doing at home. And they're getting paid for it. Like he or she is sitting there pointing the game at the camera at the game. And yeah, they got a small viewfinder, but they're at the Super Bowl. They're in the crowd. They're in the thick of it. They're in the atmosphere. And for me, that's what it was all about. It was being, if I couldn't be a rock star because I didn't pick up an instrument until I was much older, and I should have. It's my only regret. Would have been a rock star. The way to be in a live environment where you didn't know what was going to happen next, that wasn't 9 to 5, that was unpredictable, would be live sports. So I didn't care the medium. Just put me there.
Were you ever a Bills fan? I know you grew up in Ontario,
So growing up in Southern Ontario, I tell this story a lot, and sometimes I worry it's going to get me punched in the face, but it happens. Razor would say it's an improvement. So the story in Southern Ontario is, not every Bills game was able to be seen in Southern Ontario because there were blackout rules at different times and what have you. So I grew up on Pat Summerall and John Madden.
Okay.
And as soon as I ask you this question, everybody's going to know what team I grew up cheering for. So
Dallas
every
Cowboys.
every Sunday, Summerall and Madden called every single Dallas Cowboy game. I mean, I couldn't even help it. I'd turn the TV on and there's Roger Staubach, there's Tony Dorsett, there's Randy White, who became my favorite linebacker of all time, and Ed Too Tall Jones and Drew Pearson and just all these guys. I thought, these guys, there's a little bit of character to this team. So that's the team I watched every single Sunday and got to know them. So that was a team I grew up watching. And all the way through my years of living in Georgetown, that was the team. And then of course you had the Super Bowls against the Bills, and it was a very, you're sitting there watching this thing going, Buffalo's right there. I can't cheer against Buffalo. At that point, I couldn't cheer against Dallas either. So I just kind of sat amongst everybody at the party, and I'm thinking, okay, I can't dump who I'm rooting for, but I really don't want to cheer against Buffalo either. It was another weird thing, and it has to be a Southern Ontario thing where you're from there, but once you started to see the Kagan offense and love everything that Jim Kelly and Thurman Thomas and Bruce Smith, I mean, it was really a different version, right, of the Staubach Cowboys. You had all these personalities and characters in Buffalo. I thought, I like this. And of course, you had Van Miller calling the games. You thought, this is awesome. So it was, kind of man in the middle. If somebody hadn't already written that song, who became very popular and had a lot of money over his musical career out of Motown and onward, maybe I would make that the title of a book one day. Man in the middle. I like it.
I like it too. I mean, never know.
But I'll tell you one thing that happens. The longer you're in this business, you become a fan of the people that you meet. And that's got to be the case in everything that happens. So I get asked a lot about, so are you, is this team your number one team, or whatever team your number one team? And obviously the Sabres are my number one team. I've gotten to know every single player on this team. I've been here a decade. I'm invested in this team as much as anybody else. And yes, I love this team. I watch other teams play and I will cheer for them, not when they're playing us, but just to be successful, because you get to know some of these guys. A really good point is Zach Delpe, who came up and played for Florida in these playoffs. I didn't even know Zach was called up by the Panthers to play in the playoff series. I believe it was against Toronto, where he came up and he scored a goal. It might have been against Boston, so forgive me on that. But I just met all of a sudden Zach Delpe's back up. And I remember when he was here briefly and then he went on. The next time I saw him, he was in Minnesota. I don't know if he played that night in Minnesota, but I ran into him in the Zamboni entrance of the morning skate, and we had a really nice talk just about how much he loved it in Buffalo, wished it had worked out. He had nothing but great things to say. And you get to know these guys a little bit, and you just take a liking to them, and you wish each other luck, and you move on. So there will be some players that I'll watch and I'll think, oh, good for you, and if you're lucky enough, you can shoot them a text and congratulate them on something. But
except for anybody on Boston.
Yeah, no, there's nobody on Boston. I will tell you, I'll ask you this question. If you could build a team and pick two people that you would want to start a hockey team with, I'll tell you two names right now that I've said for years, and this is when they were in their primes. I don't know how you wouldn't have picked 37 and 63.
Oh, yeah.
It's like right now, if
Yeah,
you
Bergeron
had,
and Marchand.
yeah, it's almost like right now too. If Kachuk continues to do what he's doing with Florida, how do you not want one of those?
Absolutely. Yeah.
As much as you might hate them, how do you not want one on your team? So, um, I respect everything that players have to do and go through on the ice. Sometimes they cross the line, and I get pretty ticked off about it. And then I take myself away from that moment, and I say, I don't have to worry about it. I'm just watching the game. So,
Has there ever been a time where you almost lost it on the air? Like,
no,
is there a moment? Wow.
no,
See,
no.
that was the thing about me. I could never. I tried play by play, and I'm just like I'm too much of a fan to where I'm gonna get angry, and I feel like
Yeah,
that's like super hard as someone like me who wants the Sabres to win, but when something happens, you're gonna lose your mind, and then you might slip an F bomb or something like that, and
yeah.
then
Well, first of all, I want to keep my job, so that will never happen.
yes,
Second of all, the roles amongst our group in or any broadcast group are, they're pretty distinct. And so for me, I see my role as someone who paints a picture as to what exactly is happening on the ice, both for television and for radio. And I think probably more now than ever, people watch television casually. So what used to be a medium where you didn't have to really describe where the puck was all the time, I think more and more you have to do a little bit more of that radio call on TV because
hmm
people are looking down at their phone, or they're looking down at a tablet or something, or they're not, they are watching, but they're also scrolling. So they take their eyes off the screen for a minute. So they're kind of relying on you. This is how I view it, is to, pucks in the corner, centered out in front, and then you give that inflection, and that's when all of a sudden, the eyes leave the phone, they go to the TV.
yeah,
I'm finding, and I don't know why this is, and I'm not criticizing people, but I'm finding a lot of extra, and people will say to us sometimes, or say to me, that you and Rob talk too much. I think we probably talk the least as far as conversation as to any broadcast team out there. That's not from, we'll say Canada, where many of the announcers up there are still very traditional. But I find that south of the border, a lot of the teams are, it's almost all conversation with a
hmm
little bit of play-by-play mixed in. And I know that's what's being asked of them too at times. So I'm not raining on them, but the role for me is to paint a picture. I think it's to deliver the excitement and the energy, with some information. But at the same time, I said this to Rob when I first started working with him here, and I've worked with many other color analysts before. I said, look, I'm relying on you as a viewer or listener to tell me why that just happened on the ice. I just explained what happened. Now I need to know why. So, did a D-man pinch when he shouldn't have? Did a winger miss an assignment on a faceoff? Did what happened there? Break it down. I think Marty Baron does such a great job on the intermissions when he breaks down with his telestrator and everything. And I really pay attention during our shows to watch Marty's breakdown of those plays, because that's who I want to hear from.
hmm
And it's the same for Razor, who I don't think gets enough credit for how well he knows and understands the game. Everyone thinks the role that he had would take him out of that avenue. That's not true. Um, he really knows the game, and he sees, and he'll, sometimes we'll be in a commercial break and he'll explain, well, this happened, this happened, this happened. And I'll tell them, let them know, as we're not here to be critical of the team. We just want to describe from a guy who's been on the ice, who knows the speed, who knows the intensity, who knows the characteristics of the game to be in the live action, what just happened out there. So I don't see me needing to get, now that being said, when the Sabres get to the playoffs, and if there's some of the, you know, calls that are let go in the playoffs, which are very evident again this year, Sam Bennett punching Jake McCabe on the ice at the end of the game multiple times with Montour on top of him, I might lose it a little bit then. I'll be honest. I felt for Jake in that moment, and I really wanted to jump through the screen and defend him, which I have no hope of doing.
yeah,
And I was really angry at Montour, thinking, oh, I know you need to stick up for your team, but you need to get off Jake so he can defend himself, because he's getting pummeled in the face right now.
hmm
So those are moments that I could anticipate maybe a little bit more of my personal personality coming out, but I like to respect the game. I said this to someone very recently. My goal in doing this job is to respect the game in its entirety, and to respect Razor's role and to respect Marty's role in breaking down the game because they've been there. I haven't been there. It's too easy for me to be a fan and say, well, this shouldn't happen. This shouldn't happen. I want the guys to tell me why. And I think in a lot of things in life, that's what we want. We want answers as to why. There's a lot of opinions out there, but I want opinions from people that know why that happened.
So probably that not kick against the Islanders this season. I'm sure. I don't know how.
I definitely thought that was a kick for sure.
Oh, yeah.
100%. There's some other things that happen too before we get into a season. There's league meetings and everything else where we talk about those rules, broadcasters with the league and with the officials, the head of officiating in the NHL. We talk about that stuff and we try to get a better understanding as to what is and isn't a kick, or what is goalie interference, what isn't goalie interference. We go through it all because you can go through the wording of a rule and you can still have a different opinion on a call, right? That happens all the time, right? It's still happening to this day. I mean, it happened last night. I'm sure people in Florida didn't think that was goaltender interference. They probably think that there was enough time for Anderson to recover and get over and make a potential save, which he didn't do on the goal in overtime. I thought it was interference by letter of the rule, but again, two different people sitting at a table are going to have two different opinions on that. So we go through that stuff at the beginning of the season. And at least for me, I at least want, when people are overseeing what you do, you can have a different opinion, but I want them to look at least at my body and work and say, you know what? At least he didn't bury us. At least whether it's you give both sides, or if I feel that, and I did in that moment, I thought it definitely was directed in. Mm-hmm. So did Rob. So let Rob take it. I don't need to be the guy that says it. Again, Razor's the former player. He's the one that was fully invested as a player. He's also a fan of the team now. So let him say it. And then Marty's going to come on and say it too. So I don't know that we need to gang up and say it. I think, I'm very firm on, once you make a point, that the point is made. Just like Bandit heard me raise my voice. So in the background, he's thinking, what are you talking about?
Oh, that's funny. So, all right. So I want to get back to a little bit. You basically, you said in your article that was posted to the Buffalo News, you felt like you were replacing Elvis Presley. Just what was the challenge for you to kind of have to, I don't want to say live up to that expectation, but have lots of fans basically, all they've known is Rick Jeanneret as the voice of the Sabres.
Not the voice of Bandit you hear in the background here. Hey, Bandit, buddy. Bandit, come here, bud. I gotta quiet him down for you guys. There could be somebody coming to the door, and the door is open, sadly. Bandit, come here. Good boy. Good boy. You're a good boy. Come see me for a second. Come here. I hear you. Come here. Oh, he's right here. Okay. Come here for a second. I know you can't come up on with. Come here. You're a good boy. I appreciate that. Daddy's doing a little something here, a little live podcast. All right. You can do your live dog cast. All right. You good? Are you good? You good boy? I got this. Thanks for the heads up. Okay. I love you. That reference was certainly truthful and out of respect to everything that RJ has done. Every moment he's created here for the people of Buffalo, and for the effort and commitment for him to do it for that many years, and for his love of the city and the team. Nothing but respect for that. And I had one-on-one conversations with Rick from time to time, when we could find the time, and I made sure he knew that I did not come here to replace him. Mm-hmm. Those are my exact words. I told him that I was hired to come here, and when he is ready to retire, that hold on a second. Bandit, Bub, Bandit, focus on me for a second. Bandit, hey, boom. I got the front door open, and he's staring at it. And unless I get his attention. So for everything Rick means to this team and the city and everything else, You feel that when you walk in the booth and people turn the TV on and it's not Rick Jeanneret. In Canada, if it wasn't Bob Cole, if you were on Hockey Night in Canada, all of a sudden, when Bob started dialing down his broadcasts, or in Buffalo at one point, if it wouldn't have been Ted Darling on TV, it's just something different is not always easy to absorb, especially when it comes to sports. So I recognize that. And I think, I know for me, I don't ever want to be someone that's considered to be, chomping at the bit and waiting for someone to finish. There was a plan in Buffalo and there were decisions made. And when Rick was healthy again after a health scare, he wanted to continue on. And I was more than willing, obviously, to be ready when called upon, whenever that would be. And then whenever Rick decided that, the time was now to not call every single game, that I'd be more than prepared and ready to go. So I did not want to be the next guy rushing, again, to use a musical reference, rushing on stage to fill Elvis or David Lee Roth's shoes and just say, okay, it's me now. That wasn't the intention here. The intention was to be ready. The intention was to definitely honor Rick and honor Ted Darling and the path that both had laid down here. So that's why I made that comment, because I really do respect everything that they have meant for the city of Buffalo. And for everyone who said, don't be the next guy, I wrote an article recently and I said, okay, I get it, but no, I want to be the next guy. This is a place where if you are accepted by the people and if the team is playing well, you're going to have a nice run here. And I think we found out last year, at least I did personally and professionally, that with this team turning the corner and starting to really excite the fans, it enables me in my position to be, you talked about being excited or being upset. It's easy to be excited about this team. And I think you probably heard that in the call. So, going forward, I'll be even more excited about this group. And then I think, as time goes on, you think every night I walk in the booth, I think of both of them. It's the Ted Darling Memorial Press Box, and Ted Darling's plaque is right outside the booth, where RJ spent every single day of his career, as well as the odd. So every time I go up there, I'm going to think of him. And I think that's the right thing to have really in the back of your mind, because it sets a standard for you. And it's a standard that you should try to work and live up to, at the same time being yourself, not trying to be either of those two gentlemen, but to be yourself. I like the fact that there's a high bar. I would never want to come in somewhere where there's a low bar, because I think then you might stop challenging yourself to find new ways to get better. Like the other night, Don Stevens in Rochester, he and I were talking, and he just pulled me, says, can I talk to you for a minute? I said, yeah, of course. So after we had a talk with a few other people in the booth, he pulled me aside down by his microphone, says, he says, I love what you're doing. Can I just give you a little piece of advice? And he did. And, there might be a time in your career where somebody gives you that advice and you're thinking, I've got it figured out, man. You don't need to give me that advice. But when you realize when someone genuinely is trying to help you, like Don was for me, and and when people do it the right way, hey, love what you're doing. You're great. I honestly love it. Just next time when this comes up, think of this. And I'm thinking, you're not wrong. And I actually did do that. And you're right. I know I shouldn't do that, but I did, because I'm trying to live up to standards that were set. So the example is, if you get a number wrong when you're calling a game. So let's say, and I'm sure everyone has heard a game that I've called, or any play-by-play announcer, where we'll call the name of a player, and let's say 61 has the puck, not 81, and we'll get the 81 number called instead of 61. Could be on the same wing, could be in a far corner, whatever the could be orange numbers, whatever the circumstances. You want to hurry up to get it right, and sometimes you just get a name wrong. Or you get a name stuck in your head and it won't leave. And Razor will tell me at a break, you'll say, you called this guy that name for the whole cycle of that play. And I'm thinking, oh, I did not. And then you'll go, oh, I did actually. And it just escapes you. But sometimes when you catch it, at least for me, because of that bar being so high here, there were a couple of times that Don pointed out, and I know I did it, where I'll apologize in the moment. I don't know if it's a Canadian thing or what, but oh, sorry, that wasn't Cizikas, that was Clutterbuck, which I would never separate those two because I call their junior games. But let's just throw two names out there
Yeah.
from opposing teams. It'll never happen as a Sabre. And then I would just mention as the play went on, oh, sorry about that. That was a wrong name. And Don was right. It's a live moment. People will accept that you get a couple of names wrong here and there. It's if you get the facts wrong all the time that you're going to, or you constantly get things wrong that you're going to come under question. So the fact that Don took that time for me the other night, I think says a lot about who he is, because there are a lot of people in this role that would not want to share some advice to help you be better. Quite frankly, they want you to fail so they can step in and take that job. It's a very competitive business with not many jobs. And the fact that Don Stevens wanted to give me advice so I could just be that little bit, I don't say better for people to listen to, but almost better for myself. Don't worry about it. You got one name wrong. Just keep going. Keep going. Let it roll. Let it roll. Don't even, if it's comments on Twitter, don't pay attention to it, which I've learned to do. But,
still working on that for me.
Yeah, and you've certainly more grown up in the area of having it. I still remember starting this job where there was no such thing. I remember the day Twitter came out, and I said, what is this thing? And now I know what it is. And aside from raising money for really good causes, I hate it. Absolutely hate it.
Imagine,
I loathe it. And it's not even about me. I just loathe it. I look at it every night sometimes just to see what's going on news-wise. And I see the comments that are made, and I'm thinking, why are people into this? I don't understand. But then
why are there people like this?
Yeah. Then, these people we as a society have always existed, and we've always had opinions. The only other way you ever heard an opinion from someone on all these matters was you had to be sitting in a bar or a pub or a restaurant. And certainly for a stranger, you'd have to go up to their table and ask them what they think, which you'd never do. But you'd have to read the comments or the letters to the editor in the newspaper. That was the opinion section. But now it's everywhere. That said, the fact that we can use those mediums to raise money to fight cancer and awareness or many different things that need to be made aware of around the world is a good thing. So, but back to Don, I thanked him the other night, and I, certainly wished him a good game. I've seen him a couple times in these series for Rochester, but, you learn not to try to be perfect, really.
Yeah. That's the one thing I've learned is, you're not going to be perfect. If you're going to mess up, you're going to mess up. You just got to find a way to basically get past messing up and, be better. You're like, okay, I messed up there, but I'm going to get better.
When you really mess up, it'll be one of the very few times that Alan Davis actually comes to talk to you. And just know that. Then you'll know that you really need to correct something. But the good news about Alan is he'll give you the opportunity to correct it, because he's an opportunity guy. So,
I mean, he gave some basically kid that was still in college a shot, and I got the job at Odyssey even like a couple months before actually a month before I graduated college. I walked across the stage on Saturday, started literally on the next Tuesday. So
yeah. No, you got a good man in your corner there. Just don't get him angry. I don't like when he's angry. It's an old TV show reference. Had nothing to do with Alan Davis. For those of you old enough to see the original Hulk.
Oh yeah. So what I wanted to know is, we were talking about the team, and it has been a rough 10 to 12 years, but we're starting to see them get on the uprise, to the point where they were basically 1 point away from, 2 points technically from being in the playoffs. But obviously we had that pandemic season. How difficult was it to call games without any, like, the arenas were empty, and I believe for road games you had to do it remotely from, KeyBank Center, and had to call the game on a monitor. What was that feeling like?
Yeah, it sucked. First of all, the buildings were empty. It was just the weirdest feeling ever. Secondly, people I work for, and I think every not every, but I would say 98% of the play-by-play group, everybody loathes being not at the game. It's not what we trained ourselves to do. It doesn't bring the best out of you. Yeah, you can do it remotely. It does not give you the best broadcast. I will argue to anyone who's ever not done this job, you just don't understand. The feeling of a live crowd behind your call, having that flow through your headset, feel it through your chest, all of it. And whether it's a press box that might be swaying a little bit if you're in a Saddle Dome in Calgary or an older building, which of course there aren't as many of those around now, but when you feel the building shake and you feel the atmosphere in the building, it does creep into your call. That's the whole idea of doing play-by-play. And when we had to do it remotely, it was tough. You had to do it for obvious reasons. The world was going through it. It was nothing you would take personally. The hard part was sometimes you had people around you saying that this is the way you'll do it forever, and that was the part where you thought, okay, how do we feel about that? What do we think about that? And I know that there are some veteran broadcasters who had a real good run, who stopped working in the business because they felt if this is the way it's going, it's not what I dreamt of. It's not what I signed up for. And there's a lot of people that'll be quite happy calling a game off a monitor, and that, good on you. It's, it's not something that I think brings the best out of a play-by-play broadcaster now. That said, a number of times I've called CONCACAF Champions League soccer games and had great energy in them, where I was not in Honduras or I was not in Mexico. And I think, some of the Sabres games, as this team did start to turn the corner, and through those, there were some good games. But I like to tell people that when you're just calling it off a monitor, you're more reactionary than you are anticipating what is happening on the ice. And you know it because you're at sporting events. When you're at a hockey game, you can kind of anticipate the feel of what is about to develop. Doesn't mean a goal is going to be scored, but whether it's a player coming over the bench that's behind the play, which you don't see on a monitor, like all of a sudden there's a different player on the ice. Where'd he come from? But you see that when you're at the rink, and you can see, obviously the referee in behind the play and how they're viewing something. Is the arm going up? Is the arm going up? There were times we didn't know that the net was empty as well, because you've got a shot at following the game, and everybody back home, the guys in the truck and the girls in the truck are being told at some point that the net is empty, but they don't get that as quickly as if you're there and you see it. Like, there he goes, net is empty. And then you can, you bring your viewer to that moment too. So a lot of it, like I say, I like to say, was reactionary, which I didn't like. It felt like you were behind the play a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And up in Toronto, Joe Bowen calling Leafs game in this past playoff, he got, I felt so bad for Joe, and I see Joe, and I worked with Joe when I was in Toronto. He got caught on one where after the Leafs scored their first round series winning goal, the camera shot did not go immediately to John Tavares, who deflected the puck. It went to Morgan Riley, who shot the puck. So Joe, who was not at the game, was sitting watching on a monitor, and he gave it the call that Morgan Riley shot went in untouched. He didn't see that John Tavares was the first one in the line going to the bench, which is your real indication about who got the goal. Unless it's a brilliant assist, sometimes the goal scorer will push the amazing passer to the front of the line. That will happen once in a while.
Mm-hmm.
And he got caught on that, and some people were very hard on him on Twitter. And
it's an evil place.
Yeah, I immediately knew what Joe was going through, and I felt for him, and I could easily reach out to him, but he also handled himself very well. I mean, he just jumped on. He said, well, hey, sorry, folks, I'm sitting in front of a monitor. I'm not at the game. I didn't see who went through the line first. In the excitement of the moment where the Leafs had just won their first playoff series in 19 years, he's not really in a position to hold anything back. It's going to come out, same as it would have for RJ if he was sitting there. And if RJ didn't know, or any play-by-play person, that it was deflected in front of the net, because you're not there and you're not seeing the front of the line. So, for those reasons, I'm really glad. And I'm also very thankful that, our crew in Buffalo got to go back on the road for the most part last season. We didn't go out in Western Canada or California, but we're back, to my understanding, of full-time next year. And
Sweet.
And being in every rink certainly is what we're hoping for. And I personally think it's the best for the game. Now, that being said, if they said you're sitting in a studio again, calling it off a monitor, then that's what you're doing, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's certain things you learn. You can't completely muzzle your honest opinion on something, but at the other point, you have to realize you're part of a team, and it's not about you. It's about an overall decision. And those were for me tough moments. It was nice being home after every game. I mean, that wasn't a bad thing. Bandit liked it. So, but it was just weird. I just, there still are some guys in some pretty prominent major league sports that are not traveling, and I feel for them. But again, you're also here to make a living at the same time. So
Yeah, and I got this is a two-parter. You were mentioning about just like the roar of having a full crowd in, and when I think about just like a roar of a full crowd, I think about this past season and when the Sabres were playing the Minnesota Wild, and that was the game went to overtime 5-5, and the atmosphere was crazy, and then Olofsson scores with, I think it was like 18.3 seconds left in overtime, and just hearing that like just loud roar. I like what I call it, roar before the horn.
Mhm.
So when you hear like the cheer, what what kind of goes into that? And also I want to ask, what has been your favorite and or least favorite arena to call a game in?
Well, that moment you're talking about, yeah, that's everything. That's so when you're not in the rink and you don't feel that, he shoots, he scores, right? And um, I think of Owen Power's first goal. I believe it was in New Jersey, and we weren't there for that. So you saw it and you're excited for it, but you didn't feel it. You didn't really see the reaction of the bench. When a goal is scored, sometimes your eyes go to many different places. Um, First of all, you're focusing on how the puck went in the net. Second of all, yes, you're getting ready for that horn and that explosion that you just mentioned. And you're also, at least for me, I'm looking around to see how are his teammates reacting. Like, how is this goal impacting them? Because this goal is something that you're hoping will have an impact on the team, right? It's not just another goal. So
Mhm.
there are special goals that have been scored, even when the Sabres haven't been winning as much as fans want them to, that you notice the team reaction. Could be the coach's reaction, could be the punch of a fist, it could be something that, it just, it's almost like the full on go signal when you want to give it a call. So for me, I'm very cognizant of sometimes trying to keep it really super clean, like Ted Darling. Amazing, super clean, smooth, precise technique in calling a goal. And then you go to the other aspect. RJ is on the definite island of his own as far as describing moments and where did that come from, but it's iconic, that you want to try to land in your own space where you're not trying to be iconic. And even Rick in the moment is just thinking, oh, boom, I got one, and he just lets it go. You want to, once you get that kind of signal that this goal is special, then you give it. And we saw a lot of that with this team this year, whether it's the Olofsson goal. For me personally, this past year, and I mentioned it in the article I wrote at sabres.com, was the Ilya Lyubushkin goal, where, are you kidding
Ah,
me? I mean, shorthanded, Lyubushkin goes from his end to the far end of the ice and scores a goal in overtime.
and he didn't
Nobody,
score that entire season. I
I'm
think that
not
was
even
his
a
first.
gambler. Yeah, I'm not even a gambler. That probably wasn't even on a gamble card anywhere or sheet or whatever you call them. I just don't bet because I don't make enough money. I want to keep it. So,
I don't
but
bet because I know my mom would kill me if she saw me betting on
yeah. But
sports.
who even put that on a betting sheet or whatever you call it? That,
Mhm.
in overtime, shorthanded Labushin's going to score. I mean, is that so? When that to me, and the reaction of the team on that goal, it was if they clinched a playoff spot, right? It was that kind of a moment. It's like, holy, and because you beat Tampa too. That was
Mhm.
you were trying to climb a mountain, and they climbed a bit of a mountain there. And Labushkin to be, he had been playing through injury and really being a warrior for the team, and a lot of things that people weren't aware of at the time, that you knew that this guy's really, he's fighting it, and he's there for his teammates anyway. So that was a big moment. So then you bring those moments. So the roar before the horn, that's a really good way to put it. But it's kind of that go signal that then you boom. And it's, I'm going to tell you, you don't write that stuff down. It's just going to come out. And sometimes it'll be silly. And sometimes you won't like it. And there's other times you'll just say, people will come up to you and say, oh, I love that one. That was great. That was great. So you just kind of trust yourself and let that one happen. So that's the first part of your question. What was the second part?
What's been your favorite
Oh, favorite rinks. Yeah.
favorite rink
Okay.
to
Well,
call
I don't
games
even
at?
hesitate. Yeah. Montreal. There's nothing when the
The
Montreal
Forum or
Canadiens,
the old or the new building that they're in,
the
the
Bell
Bell Center?
Center.
The Bell
Yeah.
Center.
I didn't call the game at the Forum. Um, So I'm going to guess that, yeah, the Forum would have had a gondola over top. See, RJ could tell you this better than me, because Danny Gallivan was, the other goat for me, as far as, when you start talking that kind of legendary broadcaster. There was just a way Danny Gallivan hovered over a game. And when that was described to me, that's how he kind of hovered over a game. And then I listened to Ted Darling. I'm thinking Ted's doing the same thing. It's almost as if they're hovering right over the player as they carry the puck up the ice. And I thought, that's what I want to do. I don't want to be just like them, but I want to have that feel, so that you're kind of floating up the ice with the play and you're right on top of it. So being in Montreal at the Bell Center, you are on top of it. The gondola hangs over the ice. And Bob Cole told us a story once when we were in there for a game when Bob was still calling games on Hockey Night in Canada. And we saw him outside the Sabres room, and I asked him, about just calling games in Montreal and what's that been like through his career. And he said, well, the president of the team came up when they were building the new rink, and he asked me how we should build the broadcast booth, because you're Bob Cole. Like, how do you want the booth? You're the guy telling Canada what's going on. So we should probably give you a good seat. And he said, you need to build a gondola here, and you need to have this booth where the guys are calling the game hanging over the ice, not 3,000 miles away from the ice, like some of the rinks are in the NHL now, where you are so far away from the game that you really have to. For me, I'll stand up a lot and try to lean over the glass to try to feel like I'm inching closer to it. So for me, it's Montreal. We get there, and of course, Razor too. I mean, there's the infamous game where when Rob was going through his pocket square era, let's call it, where many different things became pocket squares. And I remember the night that started too. But in Montreal, he took a hot dog and he shoved it in his pocket, and then he pulled it out during our opening hit and he ate that. So there's an atmosphere there when the Canadians are going, and when the Sabres are going. That's going to be fun, because there's a real atmosphere. And a lot of it is because you're right on top of the ice. You can feel it. Detroit's new rink is the same. Little Caesars, they've got a gondola. You stand up there, you look down, there's the game. You're not looking out and you're, holy cow, those guys are. I remember my first game I ever called for Buffalo, when they were, trying out some voices when Rick started to not travel as much. And the first game I did with Harry Neal, which was another, oh my goodness, is this happening moment, right? For a kid from Canada watching Hockey Night, was in Anaheim. So I go from an Ontario Hockey League rink and World Junior Championship rinks, where the buildings, even to the World Junior Championships, were never that large. Even to the World Championships, for me, it was in Halifax and Quebec City. So the Colisée would have been the biggest rink at that point. Aside from some games in Hamilton, at the time it was called Cops Coliseum. But I got to Anaheim. I remember standing in the booth and looking at how far away the game was. And I'm not going to say the words, but I just thought, I'm in trouble, because the game used to be so close to me that, you just pick up names and numbers. And now all of a sudden, whoever gets the puck on the far wing and carries it down to the corner, I'm probably not going to have a clue who that guy is. Because I was just parachuted in for a game, right? You're not following the team around all the time. And B, as much as you knew the Sabres, and you thought you knew Anaheim players, you're thinking, all right, so what am I looking for? The number on the arm from this far away? Are you kidding me? But we pulled it off that night, and mainly because I knew, all right, I'm just going to lean on Harry. I'm just going to say where the puck is. There's a lot of Sabres shoot it in, a lot of Anaheim clears it out, because you weren't quite sure and you didn't want to get it wrong. And then Harry Neal was Harry Neal. So that was cool. Did you ask a place I don't like?
If you want to say a place that you don't like to.
Yeah, because there isn't one, because I love this job. But I think what I just stated probably is the point I would make. There are some rinks where you are a lot closer to the action. Edmonton, you're 8,000 miles away from the game. The home broadcast is down closer, and everybody else, or at least the way broadcasters, are up above the clouds. Mm-hmm. So you got to pop your ears, you got to blow your nose, pop your ears, and make sure your glasses are clear, to find orange numbers on a blue jersey or blue numbers on an orange jersey from somewhere on a stairway to heaven. So, but it's the NHL. I'm not complaining. I'm just saying you're not so close. That's all.
What do you like the broadcast booth at KeyBank Center? I will say I've never been into it, but being around the guys at WGR, they always tell me that the worst broadcast booth is the one at Hard Rock Stadium because their away broadcast booth is in like this little corner, and so
In
they
there.
literally can't like if the play's on the other side of the field, they really can't see what's happening.
Yeah, you know what? No, the booth in Buffalo is fantastic. It's right at center ice. You're not too far away. Um, I know they moved RJ down a few nights to do some special broadcasts. I mean, perfectly, you'd love to be, where the 200 level is in the rink,
Yeah.
and where the camera locations are. In a perfect scenario, like it is in Dallas and LA, you're kind of in that spot. You're right above kind of the 200 level because the game again is right there. I mean, you feel like you're in the game. So Dallas is another love to call a game in LA. Because you're in that kind of spot. You're not all the way up on the box. You're down to a point where the game is happening right directly in front of you. You can hear it, you can feel it, you can smell it, and the fans are around you too. The other thing about being all the way up in these press boxes, sometimes you're not in amongst the fans. You're not feeling that vibe. You feel it when there's a goal or when they're angry and yelling at the refs, but just to turn around, we turn around for commercial breaks in some cities, and we can look around us. And as you can imagine, with Razor, and when Mayday was with us, people want their autographs. They want to talk to them. You're in it, right? You're in the game. You're not detached from it. You're not in some faraway place. Another
Absolutely.
song title for you, but
Yeah, that Stairway to Heaven drop that you put in there, I was like, oh, that song is overplayed way too much.
yeah, but it's what.
It's a good song, but
They don't write songs like that anymore. Well, I'm sure somebody does. Someone's going to argue.
yeah.
Yes, they do. Okay.
For me, I will
Haven't
say
heard
that
one.
like my favorite Led Zeppelin song is Kashmir.
Yeah.
And so now this is just out of
I have
left
too many
field.
favorites. I have too many favorites to pick one. I really
Well,
do.
so this might be a little bit difficult for you. So I used to when I was at Buffalo State, we did this thing called top 3. But since this is I'm going to say top 5. Do you have
Yeah.
your top 5 favorite artists you just absolutely love to listen to if you could choose 5?
Well, Van Halen's first. Um, from day one that I saw Eddie Van Halen smile and play guitar and jumping around on stage, and David Lee Roth dancing around with long blonde hair that I wished I had when I was a teenager, and could get all that attention from the girls. And then Michael Anthony with the Jack Daniels bass that I never even had a drink of Jack Daniels at that point in my life, but I just thought, well, that looks cool. And then Alex Van Halen was one of the first, if not the first, to have the double bass drum kicker going. So that was pretty cool. And then they were, for me, I'm a big guitar guy and harmonics. So if you got good harmonies and guitars, harmony with guitar and harmony with vocal, then I'm all in. So Van Halen was my band. Um, Growing up, still is a massive fan. Are we going with 3? Is that what you're doing?
3 or 5, whatever you I went with 5 just because I was like,
Oh,
man,
you did 5.
yeah, this might be tough. So,
Well, the Beatles. I'm on a
oh,
big Beatles crush lately, and I
can't
mean,
go
you
wrong with
always
them.
are. Yeah, you always are. But then you kind of get into these really nice tracks where you start hearing Beatles songs that you thought you'd heard before but hadn't, because you're really diving deeper. And for me, I'm going to give credit to the Beatles channel on Sirius XM. Um, Radio, because I never used to have satellite radio, but recently I've had it for a couple of years, and the deep dive into the stories behind everything, and also the Let It Be documentary that was on Disney Channel or Disney Plus, whatever it is.
Yeah.
I watched that just in the past year, and that just blew my mind, to actually watch a band sit and create songs that in that moment you're watching, they don't yet know the words to an iconic song that you know the words to, and that just, even thinking about it now, it just blows me away. It's like, no, this is going to be the lyric here. George Harrison sits down and says, "I got a little song here. I don't know how it's going to go." I go, I do. That's just so weird to watch and so cool at the same time. So I'm deep diving into them. Um, I don't own every Rolling Stones album, but there's something about the, I'm not going to say simplicity, but maybe that is a bit of a word, because with the blues background the Rolling Stones really came from, and the music that they started playing, really blues generated, even mixed with a little bit of country, and then the way they just turned that into their own version of rock and roll, that is just timeless. It's absolutely timeless, for me. Those are three classic bands, so that would be one, two, three. I know there'll be people listening saying, "I can't believe you didn't say a certain band." Um, you want five that I couldn't absolutely. I'm trying to think about who was in my. Well, yesterday when I was gardening, I had Pink Floyd Dark Side of the Moon in with the Beatles. So that was my like 5 disc. I had 2 discs from the Beatles White Album. I had a Beatles #1 disc, and then I had Dark Side of the Moon. I'm sure I'll think of some others here as we continue to talk, and I'll think, oh, I can't believe I didn't say that. But, I went through both versions of Black Sabbath when I was a kid growing up, both the Ozzy and Randy Rhoads, and then the Ronnie James Dio, which were very different from one another because of just the different vocalists, and the different types of songs that were written with Ronnie James Dio. But I really got into some of those albums with Ronnie. And then when I found out he's about 4'11", and the power that came out of his voice just blew me away. And Queen would be up there again. Just, you talk about harmonies and power and guitar bands. Queen, just so unique. And I never got to see Freddie Mercury live. Sadly, I had an opportunity and I didn't do it. And I will forever kick myself for that one. But Queen would be up there as well. So any Southern rock right now, I'm a big fan of Blackberry Smoke. I don't know if you've heard of that band. Southern rock band. If you haven't, I would give them a little YouTube Google and check them out. Love to play guitar along to their stuff. I think it's really good. So, yeah, that's it. We're going to see Bryan Adams in June.
Oh, that sounds like fun.
He was a guy growing up that was, kind of must listen to. Waking Up the Neighbors was kind of the last big one for me that I would listen to almost every day. And that one, if we want to talk musically, was when I realized that sounds like Def Leppard.
Yeah.
So, it was kind of this, wait a minute. So Bryan Adams could sing songs on Hysteria, and Def Leppard could sing songs on Waking Up the Neighbors. And then you find out it's the same producer. And I go, oh, that's why.
Yeah.
I get it now.
For me, probably one of my favorite concerts I ever went to go see was Roger Waters, or I went to go see Fall Out Boy, Weezer, and Green Day. That was such an incredible show. Obviously, Green Day is my second favorite next to Pink Floyd. One of my favorite stories is, so my aunt went to go see when they were on their Dark Side of the Moon tour. I think they came to the Odd in '74, and my dad was a big Pink Floyd fan, and my aunt didn't take him to go see them, and he was so mad at her. I think he didn't talk to her for like a week, and I'm like, yep, I'd probably do the same thing. It's just,
well, that brings back to the story too. My parents once for Christmas gave me a Motown album, and I was young enough that I just started collecting record albums back then. Heart Barracuda was my first 45 that I ever owned. If anyone doesn't know what a 45 is, Google it. And then the first album was an Elvis Presley record because my dad grew up on that, and then he had me growing up on Elvis, which was cool. But they bought me an album once for Christmas that I had definitely never asked for. And I don't know how they thought I had an interest in it, but I'm glad they bought it for me, because I look at that record now and I think, this is classic, and this is where music came from. It was a Motown album. So I grew up not really knowing anything about Motown. Even as a kid, when you start getting into music when you're young, you don't deep dive into where Elvis got his music from.
Yeah.
You don't deep dive into, where any band really kind of get their influences from, whether it's the Beatles or Elvis or whoever back in the day, Buddy Holly, but then, now you start deep diving in, like I said before, and you go down that rabbit hole and you find out, wait a minute. So Fats Domino sang a Beatles song, and the Beatles would sing a Fats Domino song because they're all fans, and Little Richard would do this and then you look at where music came from and how it progressed. And, that's why for me, like, I get it's a different era, and everyone who's going to be 30 years younger than someone is going to have this conversation that it's, the eras are just different, and everyone's going to say they don't write songs like that anymore because you grew up in that era. It's just natural. But I'm still, so intrigued and amazed by the concept album era where, Rush 2112 was a big one for me, where, the whole album is basically telling this really unique, wild, almost psychedelic story with amazing music behind it.
The Wall.
And concept albums, The Wall, huge. I don't know if anybody does that anymore. Maybe they do. You'd have to tell me. But they were so unique, and they
I know
just stand
the Who
alone.
has Tommy, I believe. Tommy, that's another concept album.
They stand alone forever, to just really musical genius. And Dark Side of the Moon too had its certain theme to it throughout the whole making of the album. So yeah, that's what I love about the music. I love creating, and that's part of this job. It's the creating of, you don't know what's coming out of your mouth next. Sometimes,
Absolutely.
like I said before, sometimes you love it, sometimes you hate it. I said tuck like a truck once, and I thought, what did I just do? Oh my gosh. I went for the easiest rhyme. And I think it was the Vegas game where he got the goal, and he came barreling down the right side and cutting into the net and tuck like a truck. And I thought that was dumb. But I didn't get ripped I ripped myself for that one. I was hard on Dan. I said, Dan, don't ever say. And I talk to them sometimes. I come up with ideas and I go in the room. I had one for Alex, and I'm not going to tell you what it is because I might use it one day. And I said, I've got this great one if you score a really important goal, or when you score a really important goal. Oh yeah, what is it? So I told him, and he says, no, don't do that. I'm thinking, all right, if the player says don't do it, I'm not doing it. And
yeah,
my wife she also said don't do it. She said, no, don't do that one. I thought, why? I think that was funny. She says, yeah, well, okay, you're on your own island there, dude. So
here's one. Now you've actually got me into my one question that I did write down. So you call Tage Thompson, you say Tage TNT Thompson, and funny, his initials are TNT, and you say you call it TNT because his shot is so hard and so quick, it's like an explosion the the AC
explodes off his stick and blow up the
dynamite,
net, all that stuff. But if you're going somewhere, I think you know where you're going. That was the genesis too. If you're talking ACDC.
So this is one that I remember I saw this from. I'm not gonna take this as my own because I saw this on Twitter from my colleague Brayton Wilson. We were just like, there was one time we did this was back before Tage was like what he is now, one of the best players in the NHL. But he put out a tweet called "Turn the Tage" and said kind of, and so have you ever thought about maybe that could be an idea for Tage Thompson? Turn the Tage, the Tage Thompson.
So which artist are you thinking of in that moment, though?
Bob Seger.
Okay, so you're going right there. That's good. Because you could have said Metallica too, right?
Oh, I know. Metallica did a pretty good job.
I was thinking Seger first, for sure. But I didn't know where you were going with it. Turn the Tage. Well, one of the other calls I used for him that I actually really liked the name when he talked about he used to have a YouTube channel, and it was called Tommy Dangles. So he scored a goal this year, and I said Tommy Dangles, and I actually felt pretty good about that one because he came up with that name himself. And when he would talk about it, he would smile and have a smile on his face. I thought, I'm going with Tommy Dangles because he did just dangle everybody for that one. I mean, this guy who's 6 foot, blah, blah, just dangled, through 2 or 3 guys to get to the front of the net and put that puck in the net. So I gave it the Tommy Dangles call. But yeah, I'm open.
Feedback from him about it.
Oh, he loved it. I made an effort at the end of the year. I wrote about this to talk to the core guys, the young guys, the guys who, this is it's every player's team, but there's the leaders in the room. I talked to them. I thanked them for the season they had and how that certainly enabled me to just let myself be me and have fun with it and see where I'd go with my own calls. And I asked them if they, ever had anything they needed to talk about, please talk to me. Cause I think, we are part of a team here. They're playing on the ice, but I also want to make sure that I respect whatever way that they want to be at times identified. Doesn't mean all the time I'm going to, say something that a player wants me to say as far as describing something. But if there's something that they really like, for example, Tage Thompson with his Tommy Dangles, if that was something he did when he was a kid or a teenager and he liked it, then I'll use it. I think it works, for him. But yeah, I've never had anyone come up to me and say, don't use that one again. They were all very, very nice with their words at the end of the year too. So, when you think about the ceiling for this team and where it is, it's pretty amazing what could lay in front for this group of guys and what we're going to get to describe going forward here. Dylan Cousins for me hasn't even come close to how good of a player I think he's going to be in the NHL. And that doesn't mean I mean, like, this 30 goal guy, I still see being one of the best all around players in the game when he gets to that point where Dylan Cousins is just dominant and I mean by doing all the little things right in the game that you could see he gets it right. He's a smart player. And then you combine the offense with an ability to play a solid, complete 200-foot game and lead a team. And he's still in his infancy within being an NHL hockey player. I can only imagine how good this guy can be. Rasmus Dahlin, we're starting to see him blow the lid off of things. And when, we get a completely healthy season out of guys like that, just where is that bar for them? We talked about the bar with me and my job with Ted Darling and Rick Jenneret. The bar for these guys, they're kind of setting their own bar now because of the last decade of disappointment in this city for fans and for the organization too, and getting to where they want to be. Now, all of a sudden, you've got some guys kind of saying, no, we're setting the bar pretty high here, and we completely expect to put in the work to get there and then get there as a group, which is really neat. So I'm really excited as to what's going to come out of all of our mouths over the next 10 years, because I think we're going to be treated to some really entertaining hockey. I really do. Not just saying that because I'm here. I can, pardon it, but it's another song. I can feel it coming.
If Kyle Oposo doesn't come back, and I think that this season we kind of started to like him, even though his production kind of came down a little bit from last season.
You just started to like him now? My God, shame.
But who do you think will be the next captain of the Buffalo Sabres if it ends up not being Kyle Oposo?
Yeah, I'm not going to skirt your question, but I don't. I don't think I know. I really don't. Are there a number of candidates who could be captain?
Like to see as the captain
for the day? Well, any of the candidates, I would have no issue with being candidates let's say if and when Kyle Oposo is no longer with the Buffalo Sabres, whenever that date is. I don't know when it is. Mm-hmm. I have nothing to share. But the day he is no longer a Buffalo Sabre, when you go through the leadership core in the room, I love the personality of Rasmus Dahlin. I love his competitiveness, his skill level. Alex Tuck, love his personality, love his commitment, love his desire to keep getting better and to lead this team. Same can be said for Tage Thompson. His work ethic, what he's gone through to get to where he is and where his game has gone from 0 to 100 in 2 years. Mm-hmm. Dylan Cousins already talked about it. I don't know if I mentioned him here in this part of the conversation, but Dylan Cousins is just to me, it looks like he's a born leader. Just the way he handles himself and how guys are around him. So, there's 4 names right there, and I'm going to leave some out. I just think, Owen Power at some point in his career too, we're really going into year number 2 of a full season for him. If he reaches his NHL potential that many expect he will, after you look at what he did in his first full season, you could lead around that guy too. So I don't think it's interesting you asked the question, because I don't really think, because of the number of people that could be captain of this team, I don't think it's an issue. Mm-hmm. I think it's more of an issue if you look down the roster and you have to find someone.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Right now are you really going to split hairs over any of the names I just picked if they're named captain of the team and give an argument where, no way, man, that shouldn't happen? You could
all,
feel differently about something, but I don't think you lose in any of the names I just mentioned. Um, you know,
all I just ask that if it is Darlene, I want to be able to get a like I want the Saber store to be like, if anybody has jerseys with the A, you can replace it with the C, and we'll take care of. That's all I want. If that happens, that's the only thing. I hope I don't. But you're
see,
talking
now
about.
you're thinking too much like a fan and not an entrepreneur. And what you want to do in this life before you retire and look around for people to look after you, you want to make sure you make some money. So
Yeah.
save your money. Don't gamble it all away.
Oh, I know.
Um, and be careful what jerseys you buy. Like, be selective on that.
Oh yeah, I'm
Yeah.
one of those guys that normally would, if I buy a jersey, I normally like for the Bills. My first ever like jersey that I like really was big on, that I was happy to have, that I was Thurman Thomas. Thurman
Mhm.
Thomas, because obviously it was never going to go out of style. But um, I wanted to ask, some of your calls when you go, that was magic, or like with for example, why am I Dylan Cousins, how you call it, the workhorse from Whitehorse. Does that just pop into your head, kind of like what they say with RJ when, like, if you were to ask him, like, how did you come up with it? And he says, it just pops into my head. How
Yeah.
does
Oh,
it go through your mind when you think of like a call?
well, I'll be specific with the first two because I think I've said it before about the second example, and I need to say it on every time that I've interviewed about it. The first one, that was magic. I've done since I was in junior hockey. I don't know why, but when I was calling Ontario Hockey League games in Toronto with St. Mike's, um, we were super close to the game. I mean, pucks were coming into our booth all the time. That's how close to the ice we were. And when the majors would get into the playoffs and the building, even though it only sat about 2,000 people, if that, when it got packed, and we were right, like I said to you before, we were right amongst the fans and we were right on top of the glass. It was crazy close at Bathurst and St. Clair down in Toronto at St. Michael's College School Arena. Um, I used that for a goal that I just thought, wow, that was magic. And I remember I thought, oh, I might keep that one. It's nothing new. It's nothing super original, but it was just, if I give it that delivery all the time, maybe I can make it something that I can go to when it's a nice place. So I actually hadn't used that a whole lot in Buffalo till this year because there weren't a ton of magical moments, right? Where people could just kind of maybe wrap that one up. The workhorse from Whitehorse is all Ray Ferraro from TSN, or now with TNT, right? Is he with TNT? I got to get the right network.
Uh,
Anyway, Ray
I,
Ferraro, who
yeah.
was at the time with TSN in Canada and doing the World Junior Championships, called Dylan Cousins the workhorse from Whitehorse. And I thought, that's brilliant. That's perfect. That's exactly what he is. This guy doesn't stop working. He's a leader. Um, so I messaged him either on Twitter or somehow, and I said, do you mind if I use this? And he said, no, go ahead. Because that's a class act that Ray Ferraro is. So I asked his permission if I could kind of continue that in Buffalo over the tenure of his career. And I didn't do it right away because I kept trying to think, oh, what else is there? And I thought, no, stop looking. That's it. Like, just go with it. And
Probably like with the Eiffel Tower. I'm assuming you get that reference based off of how it connects with like the Eiffel Tower, Eiffel.
yeah, I did that one after I met Jack for the first time. He was this really tall 18-year-old kid, and I thought, whoa, this is a big dude. I think the Eiffel Tower thing would work for him if it really takes off for him here. And I didn't know how long I would continue with that. I remember the first time I used it was a game against Ottawa. I wasn't sure about it, and I could tell when I listened back to the call because I knew some people would think, "Oh, that's stupid." And that's another point again where I had to learn that. Well, don't care what they think, just do it. Like, create. Right? You're not always going to create something that everybody likes. So, but if you stop trying to create, then you're stifling yourself. So, don't do that. So I learned that, and then I heard of a young Sabres fan in Nashville who
Yeah,
heard
I
that and
remember
then
that.
made
He
his
would he would
yeah
stack up pucks.
yeah, and then I heard from other parents that their kids were saying it at home when they would watch the game, and I thought, well, if the kids are saying it, then I'm going to keep using it. That's what this is about, right? This is about growing up watching the kids who look at these players and they're amazed by them, and they're just like gobsmacked. They're like, oh my goodness. So do it. And that happened too with Tage Thompson's TNT. Um, part of it came too from knowing Tage a little bit and watching him work through everything and injuries and getting into the lineup. But I didn't know his middle name was Nathaniel. I didn't look that up. My wife told me. She said, his middle name is Nathaniel, so it actually is TNT. I had no idea.
Yeah, I
So,
remember seeing that.
yeah, that just kind of fell in the lap, which was fine. But someone came up to me. Now, RJ had to be still calling games at this point. So that's only a couple of years ago. But I was doing the interviews at that time on a night when Rick was calling the games down in our studio down at ice level.
Mm-hmm.
And somebody came into that room and said, "Hey, we just thought you should know there's a bunch of kids playing mini sticks outside in the hallway here at the rink, and they're all saying TNT scores." And I thought, well, okay, this isn't going anywhere. And I told Tage Thompson about that too. And he said, well, then you got to keep using it, right? Because everyone goes back to when you were a kid and someone would put a little bit of a fun, not really a nickname, but kind of asterisk or whatever hashtag on a goal. So
kind of like with Jason Pominville, how RJ called him.
100%. Yeah.
Population
that's
of
right.
Pominville goes up by one more.
Yeah. I mean, it's brilliant. It's right there in Pominville. I don't know that I would have thought of it, right? He did. Nobody else except RJ probably comes up with that, but you don't know. But he trusted his ability too. And he says, I got this. It's Pominville. It makes total sense. Kent Manderville played in the NHL. Nobody said Kent, the population of Manderville went up. It just that never happened for Kent. He probably feels robbed. If he had RJ calling his games, if Kent Manderville played with Pominville, then what would RJ do?
Yeah, that's true.
Twin Cities, I don't know.
Yeah. So one thing I want to know is just, I guess, try and like maybe put yourself into like an inside of the like as a journalist. There have been rumors with Connor Hellebuck being a possible trade candidate to the Sabres. Would you consider like that being someone that you would want for the Sabres team? Because they're just like so close, and this would probably like put them into a position where, I don't know if contending for a cup is the right word to use, but being really competitive and maybe like not being a wild card, maybe being a division, like one of the top 3 teams in the Atlantic.
You know what? I think you're kind of in a way, you just made a point in your question there that's going to allow me to duck being a journalist, because I can't do that in my role. Okay. When I first started working for a team in the NHL, Mark Askin, who's a producer for Hockey Night in Canada, and he was a producer for Leafs TV at the time, he said, because I came from the Fan 590 in Toronto and I'd been there for 19 years. And as soon as I was full-time with the Leafs, he said to me, he says, "Hey, just so you know, you're no longer a journalist. You are no longer a reporter. So even if you think you want to come here and start breaking stories, this is no longer your job. You just sit back, let other people do it. You let other people speculate, and you call the game." And he's not wrong, right? Because you're in a different seat. But I will say this, when you asked the question, I listened carefully because I needed an out. Remember I told you I listened for my out. No matter who you have in goal next season, and let's say you go outside the organization to get an experienced goaltender. Forget that it's Connor Hellebuck. Let's just say it's an experienced, proven goaltender. Are you going to make that move and maybe surrender some capital that you have, whether that be cap space, whether it be young developing talent that you really didn't plan on moving because you didn't anticipate that said player might be you can't predict the future. It's probably the best way to put it. You didn't know your team would come a win away from the playoffs. You didn't know that maybe if you've had internal discussions that goaltending was the reason you didn't get there, then you're at least considering it. But what I can honestly tell you is those discussions would have to be, if you make that move, if you give up that capital that, let's face it, the Sabres haven't had for a long time. That's why it's taken a decade plus to get back to having these conversations, because the cupboard, with all due respect for guys that are working their tails off in the American Hockey League, the cupboard just wasn't enough to facilitate getting through some gap seasons and pushing on to victory. So make this move now that you have these guys who are, even this year, in Roch and guys in Buffalo. If you surrender some of that, are you a Stanley Cup contender? Now, someone could argue, just get in and you're a contender. I get the argument. Someone will say, look what Florida's doing. They've got Sergei Bobrovsky. Well, okay. They also have Radko
Matthew
Gudas.
Tkachuk.
They have Radko Gudas. They made a trade to get Tkachuk. They made a daring trade, but a good trade for them, right? Which during the regular season, not a lot of people thought was going to pay off for them. And they got in by the skin of their teeth because the Penguins lost to who? Chicago.
Oh, I was going to say I knew it was a bad team. I thought it was Columbus.
Well, a team that was struggling, yeah. So Columbus, Chicago. So they get in, and good for them. This is what happens. The LA Kings did it years ago, right? And they go on to win the Stanley Cup as the lowest seed. So I think you ask yourself, all right, so if you get that goalie, what are you willing to give up? And are you a Stanley Cup contender? And is the goaltender the reason that you did not get those extra 2 points last year? So those are all discussions that any hockey front office is going to have when these opportunities come up. And I don't think for a minute, you ever want to expect that any general manager around the league is not calling about if they think they need a goaltender, Connor Hellebuck. I don't know that the Sabres have. I have no clue. No one's coming to my home office here and telling me this stuff. Plus, I'm outside gardening way too much. So to answer your question, I don't know. And you're going to ask me about, would you do it? I think if you could tell yourself you had a Stanley Cup contending team by giving up capital that you right now really need and have treasured in collecting, because you want to be good for more than just next year. You want to be good for the next decade. You want to do what the Penguins did. You want to do what the Hawks did when they were running. The Penguins are probably the closest example that just for a decade, these guys are always in there and longer. So you want to be that group. Pittsburgh's cupboard got a little bit bare near the end of their run. But I remember doing a development camp, and I believe Marino was part of the development camp, and everyone's saying, Penguins have nobody. And then there's this kid Marino playing defense, and we all looked at each other at Harbor Center thinking, this kid's pretty good. Who's this guy? I thought you said they had nobody. And then he's gone on to have himself a pretty good run, and now is considered a really valuable defenseman. So what I'm saying is, I think you want to be really, really sure that you are a Stanley Cup contender, especially when you're a team that's not even in the dance yet. Are the Devils going to start giving away a bunch of guys because they didn't make it? Or are they going to try to add, likely through free agency if they see a need somewhere because they got to the second round? Are they just going to say, oh, no, we need this, give up whatever it takes? I don't know if they do that. So, for the Sabres, I think they have a core group here that it might be too early, in my opinion, to think that these guys can't do it. Do you need to add? I mean, you look at the Flyers before they became beasts. I just read a book about Bill Barber talking about that, how they had a really good young team. And then it just became this really good mix of veterans and young players eventually the management gave them when they went on their tear. Now, they were a tough team back then, and they won games in very intimidating fashion, but you can intimidate in many ways. So I don't know. I know I didn't answer your question, but I think anyone who makes that move wants to be really, really, really sure. Mm-hmm. He's 29, right? 29 years old.
Today's his birthday. I think he turned 30 today.
Well, look at that. That's why you brought it up. Good for you.
They were talking about it on Sabres Live and all the time. So it was definitely something I was curious about. But from one goaltender to another,
what did they say on Sabres Live?
Well, it sounds like that Brian really wants this to happen, and he was talking about it with Shayna Goldman from The Athletic, and I think he really wants this to happen. And
who's Brian giving up for him?
That's the point, is that you got so much talent. I definitely and you think about it with who was it that Arizona traded him to Ottawa?
Chikrin.
They were like, oh, well, how come we couldn't give what Ottawa give? Well, what Arizona probably wanted was a lot more. You're gonna give me a Jack Quinn or Yuri Kulik or a Matthew Savoy for this top end defenseman. So
Yeah.
I guess
But that's
it
kind of my
does.
point. Yeah. And that's why I, not to cut you off, but that's why I asked, well, who did Brian want to give up?
Yeah, I don't
And
know if.
I'm not ripping Brian, but that's my whole point, right? That I just
Mhm.
made is that, all right, you want Connor Hellebuck? Who are you giving up right now? I mean, who are you actually prepared to say, are you giving up on Savoy already? I mean, the guy's tearing it up in Winnipeg. Are you giving up on Kulik? Are you giving up on Roseanne? I mean, you got to think about who other teams are going to want. They're not going to want your worst players
Oh
to
yeah.
get Connor Hellebuck. They're going to want your best prospects, and you're going to have to at some point give up something you don't want to give up. And that's why I don't know, based on everything that the Sabres have built this turning of the corner on, which is getting these guys into the organization, having them come up together, have them build this bond or chemistry or culture that you can't predict. If you stumbled upon it, which they have in both Rochester and Buffalo, you're really going to start tearing that down.
Yeah.
For how long? How much of a contract are you giving? How much money are you going to give out? You have to pay other guys down the road. So I understand the wanting. I don't know who doesn't want a good goaltender, but you really have to look at where you're at in your own progression, and then you decide. So in our progression as an organization, are we okay to give up Savoy? Are we okay to give up a Kulik after we just have seen what he's done with now a 6-game goal tear in the American Hockey League in the playoffs? Maybe, hopefully, en route to a championship there. So, yeah, there's just so much more into it than saying, yeah, I want him and we should do it. I mean, it's not even. That is a half an hour show question, but go sit in the hockey room with all your scouts and the guys who put all the hours in, to the Savoys and to all these players that are overseas, and they say, okay, we're moving on from him because we think we can get a goaltender here. You might do it. You might have a whole room saying we're doing it. I get that.
So from one goaltender to another, it was only what was it, 9 games for Devin Levi or 7?
Mm-hmm.
Yep. What was that like watching him play, even though it was for a brief period of time this season? And what do you think? What are your expectations for him coming into next season?
He was fun. I don't know what to expect because I haven't seen enough of him in the NHL. So the word expect to me means I don't know. But he was fun to watch, and he was a pleasure to be around. Really engaging, inquisitive, and really confident young man. And I think all of that is what you want in any player, specifically a goaltender. Like, I really think he feels he's got this. It's up to the team to decide, does he have it more than anyone else in the organization? Because I'm pretty sure that UPL, when he went on his run of six wins or whatever it was, that he felt he understood it too. And then at some point, shooters in the NHL reminded him that you're not going to be this good every single night. So it's interesting. I really enjoyed being around that. Those are some of the moments that you look back on last season. And you say not at the expense of UPL. Certainly he probably felt that way, but for Devin Levi to come in and just kind of be given the ring and grab onto it and hold onto it and really play like he had no desire to let it go was really cool. That's what you want to see. And, Kevin talks about all the time about people that want to be here. You can have zero doubt in your mind that Devin Levi wants to follow in the footsteps of Dominic Hasek and Ryan Miller as being the next great Buffalo goaltender. There is zero doubt in my mind that's his goal, which is pretty cool from where I sit anyway, because if he puts the work in and if he continues going to school, which I think he will because he's a student of the games, a student of shooters, then he will be fun to watch for a while. At the same time, UPL was an award-winning goaltender in junior hockey before he got to the NHL. And also, his rise is not the same as Devin Levi's to his introduction to the league, but nobody's is. Mine wasn't the same as Rick Jenneret's. Rick Jenneret's wasn't the same as Ted Darling's. Yours was not the same as anyone else at the station. We all have a different path. That was what I'm trying to say here. So I'm really careful not to exclude UPL from being a bigger goaltender who finds ways to improve his game, because I can't think he's just going to go through this summer thinking, I'm just going to give it to this guy. I can't. Like, I don't see that in him. I talk to him enough. I know who he talks to for his encouragement. And we have those conversations on off days or game days and when we travel. So, I'm rooting for both guys because I think it's good for this organization if we can have two goaltenders that are battling it out and trying to steal the net from one another. I think it's great.
Kind of like with Miller Biron back in like the 2006, 2007, that kind of like little window where they were both going at it.
Yeah. So it's sport. I mean, competition is good for players. It's good for coaches. That's what sports is, competition. I mean, if you want something handed to you, you're probably not going to work that hard to keep it. So,
all right, this is my last question, and I've been doing this for an hour and a half, and I've really enjoyed it. We got the Final Four in the Stanley Cup Finals. We got, a game that went to 4 overtimes last night with Carolina.
Did you stay up?
No, when I had to get to work at 5:30, I'm like those days of trying to stay up for the late games, unless it's obviously Bills or even Sabres, I'll try. But
I took my melatonin at about the start of the second overtime, thinking, all right, you got half an hour to score or I'm out. So I was out.
So who do you think is going to be the Stanley Cup champion?
I have no idea. I'll tell you what, Florida does not want to go away. And I will say this, when I hear people talking about how surprised they are, seriously, get over it. I mean, how much hockey you're watching? Yeah, they squeaked in, but this team had a lot more.
I'm honestly not surprised.
Yeah, well, good, because, I mean, you look at what was expected out of this team, even with the trade this year after what they did last season, it was mainly disappointment and bewilderment as to what's going on with Florida. And then as the season went along, you kind of thought, we might beat Florida out for a playoff spot. And that was not part of the conversation at the beginning of the year. Mm-hmm. So I'm not surprised. I'm really impressed by how they play. I mean, they, from Nick Cousins to Radko Gudas to Bennett and Kachuk and, Barkov just started getting going last night, right? So that's a dangerous team right there. Carolina's earned every respect that they have to this point, but man, they're going to have to earn it, and they know it. I think they've got the best, certainly the best coach to motivate them. But Florida's got something about them right now that it's almost this story that everyone thinks are going to go away, right? Down 3-1 to Boston. Everyone thinks they're going away. We want Florida and Toronto, and then you get rid of them easily enough, even though the games were close. They were the closest games in all the playoffs. Everything else is a blowout. Meanwhile, the Leafs and Florida are playing 1-goal games that are down the wire, but it ends quicker. So I don't know who to pick in that series. I really don't. If Bobrovsky keeps playing the way he is, I think Florida's going to go to the final. But then you look at Anderson's numbers, and he's got the best goals against average in the playoffs right now. He's at 163 or something like that. And on the other side, goaltending could be the difference. I mean, if Ottinger has himself a series, and Robertson hasn't gotten going yet, then Dallas is a pretty deep team, especially on the back line. They're pretty deep. So they'd be tough to beat. But Vegas on that side has that kind of Florida thing going on where everyone thinks, oh, this will be it. Eichel can't do it. Stone's going to get hurt, or the goaltending won't hold up. And they just keep being Vegas. So I know I'm just not a good prediction guy because I'm a true Libra. I see all sides of everything, which doesn't help me when I get a large menu at a restaurant, and it doesn't help me when it comes to making predictions either.
Well, I just want to say thank you for coming on the show. I had an absolute blast, and just, keep doing great things for the Sabres, and hopefully, you'll be able to call a playoff game come around April in 2024.
I appreciate it. That's the plan. I told Mr. Pagula a few years ago, I said, I am here to call a Stanley Cup champion. It's going to happen. I've had a World Junior, World Championship, and Olympic champions experience. So there's one left, and it's going to be here. So let's get her done in the next few years here and not stop there. Let's go back to back, Buffalo. Come on. Who wants one? Well,
I know.
We all do. We want one to start. We got to
I've
get in
al-
first.
yeah,
And
I've always said I would rather, if I was going to go to a Bills Super Bowl parade or a Sabres Stanley Cup parade, I said I'd rather choose a Stanley Cup because the weather's nicer.
oh, interesting. I wondered where you were going with that because you got to be careful. So
I know, and it's not because I don't like it. It's just because I want to be able to like wear shorts and maybe like a
well,
jersey,
yeah, I
not have
want
to
the
wear
Bills.
like 5 layers.
I need the Bills to win a Super Bowl. My wife has a Bills tattoo,
Oh,
and I'm a huge Bills fan now. I love how they built this team. Ton of respect for coach, general manager, for Josh, how he plays the game. You know, for me, Josh is kind of Eddie Van Halen of the NFL right now. He's just looked like he's out there having so much fun, and he's going to continue to hone his craft and get better. And I kind of like the fact that all the so-called experts, who, by the way, come in the same category as people that said Boston were going to have a drop-off year in the NHL, even though the first-round exit was a shocker,
Mhm.
the Bruins did not drop off this year, and nor did I think they would. Until it happens, I don't call that. But I kind of like the fact that there are people that are selling the Bills short. I love it because I think that's just a perfect fuel. I think it's the perfect, not that they need any more motivation, but when you come as close as they've come, and now people think you're done, that your window of opportunity is past you, feed me that steak every night because I will remember that taste when you get to the playoffs and make it happen. So I'm feeling pretty good about the Bills.
Awesome. Well,
Yep.
thank you so much for coming on. Really appreciate it. That's going
Appreciate
to
it.
do it.
What's in the bottle behind you? I wanted to know the whole time here watching your backdrop. It's over
Uh,
your left shoulder.
oh, this?
No, it's an empty bottle. It's up on your shelf there. It's like, what are you drinking during the show? You got a
Yeah,
white shelf. No, you got a white shelf behind you. It's a red label and a white and red label up on the shelf.
oh,
What is that?
it's like an old fashioned
Oh, it's a
Dr.
Dr.
Pepper.
Pepper. I thought it was a beer bottle. See, there you go. Okay, cool.
No,
That's a Canadian for you. I didn't know the old fashioned Dr. Pepper
I honestly didn't even
bottle was
realize that this was like
in the shot. Yeah,
in the shot. Yeah.
there you go.
Well,
Cool.
hey man, thanks so much. I can't thank you enough for coming on. I was super nervous, and as we went through, I felt like just so comfortable. And thank you so much for being being a guest on my show. And hopefully, if maybe we could do it again sometime.
We'll do it again once we get in the playoffs.
Absolutely.
All right.
That
Come back in the den.
that's gonna do it for this episode of Dipo's Den. I have been Evan DiPasquale here with Sabres play-by-play man Dan Dunleavy, and we will see you